Welcome to Thursday Night Football, I guess. It is the weirdest single game slate that I recall in quite some time. We have tons of injuries to this game. The total was just 40 and a half on FanDuel Sportsbook with a tight 1.5 point spread in favor of the Cleveland Browns, who are playing at home. I mean, you can't even fill out a lineup on FanDuel that exceeds the cap with healthy players tonight. So it's one of those. Again, I don't know if we've had one of these before, but it is one of those. So welcome on in to the Thursday Night Football FanDuel Q&A for tonight's game. I am your host, Brandon Gdula. I'm the managing editor at numberfire.com. You can head over there to check out a lot of my content, really all of my content, of course. I am here to be breaking down the single game slate from a DFS perspective, talking about some game theory. If you have start sit questions, most of those will be answered by my start sit column that goes up on Number Fire every Thursday morning. What I do for that column is I go through and I simulate out the slate thousands of times using using Number Fire's projections as the baseline and some dynamic ranges of outcomes expectations for certain players based on their skill type, their skill, and their play type. So guys with a lot of air yards compared to guys with a little few air yards at receiver, those guys get bumped up. But I simulate that out, and then I give a baseline expectation for each player, their odds of finishing top 12 or top 24 at the position. I just say that because a lot of the time I get a ton of start sit questions, and I want to make sure that you guys check that out just to see what the Sims have to say for the week. So, Bethany, what's up, Bethany? Thanks for the kind words. This is so I'm gonna dig into this slate, and it's just so hard because we have injuries everywhere on this slate. And before I even really could dig in, I'll dig into the injuries first. But this is just a long list. You check this out on the Number Fire games and lineups page. Tons of injuries. We know that Kareem Hunt's out, Nick Chubb's out, Baker Mayfield's out, and so we got starting Case Keenum versus Teddy Bridgewater, and Bridgewater wasn't certain to play, but he is going to play. So we've got tons of value, but unfortunately, or I guess either way, we don't need it. Case Keenum can be had at $5,000 on FanDuel with that salary, and again, you cannot fill out a lineup with healthy players and exceed the salary cap. It's just not possible. Odell Beckham, not 100% sure if he's going to play. Sounds like he's on the wrong side of questionable though, so I'm kind of proceeding as if he's not going to play. But yeah, you have salary left over on FanDuel, so that's just kind of it's one of those nights. So I see some questions coming in. And I will get to those in just 1 second, but I always like to break down the single game slate from an expectation standpoint first, looking at a high level of matchups from a quarterback, a running back, and a receiving standpoint here. This number here shows Number Fire's pass defense metric, which is based on an expected points model. Cleveland rating out 21st on a per play basis, but top 5 in success rate allowed. Denver a bit tougher in both. So if you see a low success rate but a high net expected points per drop back, what you're really seeing is that they do well to limit plays more consistently, but they've been a little bit more susceptible to bigger plays, which with Courtney Sutton on the slate, that's going to be super, super relevant. Kind of borderline top 12, top 10 rush defenses for the running backs, but that's not going to be enough to get me away from the running backs in this game because of what I'll talk about in just a second. So actually some pretty good individual matchups from a unit standpoint. Neither team rating out top 12 against running backs or receivers in adjusted FanDuel points per target. And if you're not an outlier, you're not top 5, top 6, even top 6 is probably a little bit generous with the term outlier thrown around. We're looking at a pretty like wide open receiving game. However, we got 20-mile-per-hour winds, and that is not good for passing projections. Typically, even with projections being adjusted based on, high winds typically bump down over unders. That typically affects projections. Even with that, historically, projections are not bumped down enough in heavy winds. So it's going to put a bit of an emphasis on the running game. And with a lack of play volume, because both of these teams are 25th or worse in adjusted pace or pace outside of garbage time, we should expect them to run the ball, move the clock, not have a lot of plays, and not score a ton of points, which is why this is super noteworthy. In comparable games to this one, in games with since 2019, in games with totals under 44 or under, and spreads of 4.5 or lower, so a 37 game sample, we see that running backs get a huge boost in the odds that they are the MVP in an optimal lineup after the fact. So about a 30% hit rate for them overall across all of the games from 2019 to 2021 that had a single game slate on FanDuel. That bumps up almost 20 percentage points in games similar to this. You could also probably bump that up even more with the wind. So it's probably a game where we could consider fading the quarterbacks. So, but even with that, the quarterbacks are still, as expected, more likely than any other position outside of running back to finish as the MVP, and that's just what you expect. Receivers and tight ends, especially with the win being what it is, you'd probably anticipate that they're not MVPs we build around unless we're trying to get really, really different on the slate. And then quickly, surprisingly, underdogs have been more common in these game scripts to finish as the MVP. I don't know if that's variance or what, but again, we're looking at games with small spreads. So that's something definitely to keep in mind for tonight. And even though running backs are very commonly the MVP in similar game scripts, it's not always coming from the favorite. It's coming from the underdog as well. So that is something that we should keep in mind for tonight. And then one last thing, just because I always like to figure out if kickers are worth it for a particular slate. Low scoring games could definitely lead to 3 field goals being enough to make it in to an optimal lineup. We see in similar games that kickers do kind of overperform the overall expectation to make it into an optimal lineup. But again, with the wins, not necessarily trying to load up on kickers, especially because we don't really need the savings. So I'm going to go pretty heavy at running back overall. With that covered and kind of the baseline laid out, I'm going to dig into some of these questions. Question from Ramon, quarterbacks tonight. So Case Keenum and Teddy Bridgewater. They unsurprisingly again lead the slate in median FanDuel expectations across 1,000 slate simulations. That shouldn't really surprise us just because they're quarterbacks and quarterbacks tend to have a high baseline. That's why quarterbacks overall typically are the most common MVP choice. And even with the bump down in similar game scripts to this one tonight, they are the best overall bets to lead the slate in FanDuel scoring, with Teddy Bridgewater rating out much more likely than anyone else, aside from Case Keenum, to be the slate's MVP. That said, he's projected for just 1.2 passing touchdowns, according to Numberfire. That's not territory where we feel like we have to play Teddy Bridgewater, because typically the way that quarterbacks make it into an optimal lineup are, especially at MVP, is to have multiple touchdowns. Now, if we say there's not going to be a lot of touchdowns, and there probably won't be 2 passing touchdowns, and maybe they go to different players, low salaried players, or just players, maybe a tight end who doesn't have yardage upside along with that, that can still be enough for Teddy or Case Keenum to get into the optimal lineup. But with all that said, Case Keenum at 5,000 feels like the type of value play that might be 95% rostered in a typical, if these games were fully healthy otherwise and it was just Baker Mayfield out, Case Keenum getting the start at 5,000. It's important to keep in mind that salaries are relevant for tonight. And so we don't have to play Case Keenum just because his salary is $5,000. If we want, we can play Teddy Bridgewater over him. We can also go against the grain and just not play Case Keenum because, again, salary doesn't matter here. So the savings, they can feel like you have to take them, even though there's no salary, and it just feels like you can get access to other players, but you really don't have to play it that way. And so only 22% of the time is he expected to lead this slate in FanDuel points. So with that in mind, I think you could really make a case that you just fade Keenum or even fade both quarterbacks and just hope that there is a no quarterback optimal lineup, which we did actually see recently with the Seahawks and Steelers game. It was a double kicker, no quarterback optimal lineup because Geno Smith didn't do a whole lot. Ben Roethlisberger didn't do enough. And the game flowed through the running backs and had enough field goals. So, it will feel like we have to play quarterbacks, but we really don't. And honestly, sub 70% numbers for top 5 scores, kind of low for quarterbacks. So it's a slate where we can get really different. So quarterbacks tonight, I prefer Teddy over Keenum. I think both are, just statistically good plays, but you can also kind of fade them and get weird because of what this game script has to say. Question from Nick: would you start Sutton or Jaylen Waddle in a flex? That's a really good question. I'm pretty high on Waddle for this week. 120 air yards over in London, 2 touchdowns, heavy target share. The Dolphins should be getting Devontae Parker back, so it's a little bit muddy there. And Courtney Sutton, the very clear number 1 within this offense. Sutton leads the league in air yards per game at 188 over the past 3 weeks. Only Terry McLaurin is also above 135. So it's a huge gap. But again, we got wind concerns here. They might not need to throw the ball a ton just because of the Cleveland offensive expectations. That being said, I would probably still lead Sutton because he should still be good for a 25-30% target share. Jaylen Waddle's target share might come a bit back down with the Dolphins getting healthier. So good question, kind of close, but I would still go Sutton in there. Comment from Noah, well, question and comment. I just traded Gibson for AJ Brown. Thoughts? I like that. I usually I should probably say it this way. I usually don't like 1-for-1 trades within the same position just because there's a clear winner and loser. So cross position trades, much more open to from that perspective. Antonio Gibson, you never know. He might sit out this week till that shin gets right. He hasn't been fully effective. And Gibson, has just been someone that I've been targeting as a negative touchdown regression candidate. AJ Brown, arrow should be up on him, even without, with Julio Jones kind of decreasing the offensive expectations, also with Taylor Lewan. Should be a great game for AJ Brown setting up this week against that weak Chiefs secondary. So I like that one overall, and I'm pretty high on AJ Brown and a little bit down on Antonio Gibson. All right. Lost my place here. Let me scroll back up. Question from Josh: Bridgewater or Tua? I'm gonna go Tua in that one. I'll actually check out what my Sims have to say. Again, these will be based on number fires projections, but Tua is 48% likely to finish as a top 12 passer this week. Again, you can check out my start set column on number fire for the week and every week that goes up Thursday morning. So Tua is at 48% to give us a top 12 return. Teddy Bridgewater down at 32%. I think that with the win for this game, it's a pretty easy spot for Tua for me in that conversation. Question from Adam: should I start D Johnson tonight or Antonio Gibson on Sunday? So Gibson did not practice yesterday for sure, was limited Thursday. But I would go with Dearness Johnson and not really take the chance because Gibson might not play, and even if he does, he could be limited for J.D. McKissic. So I think Dearness Johnson is in the best spot among the Cleveland running backs to take over the majority of the workload. They did bring in another running back with Kelly, But I would feel pretty good if you picked up Johnson and just ride with him because again, Gibson not 100%, and we don't know even if he'll play for this week. Same question from Sean. Gibson or Dearness in the flex PPR. Yeah. Again, we don't know if Gibson's going to play. I would feel good enough with the expected role, just because with the wind here, we should expect the pass rate to go a bit down, um, and and Johnson to get a pretty heavy workload. So, the offensive output might not be as great as what we get from Washington, but there's always a chance that Gibson doesn't even play. Um, Question from Harry: giving AJ Brown, Miles Sanders, and Jovante for Chubb and Shepard PPR, yes or no? I think I'd prefer the AJ Brown side. I'm kind of getting higher on Miles Sanders. His workload's been kind of good. And I talked about this on the Heat Check preview that I do with Jim Sonis every Thursday that previews the DFS main slate. Again, it goes out on Thursday mornings, but I did a whole trend on Jaylen Hurts as a passer with Lane Johnson, and they're going to get Lane Johnson back. He's averaging 8.0 yards per attempt whenever Johnson plays, 6.8 without him. His success rate's like up 10 percentage points. The pressure rate's down like 12 percentage points. So I'm kind of getting higher on that Philadelphia offense. I think Jovante Williams is someone who is breaking a lot of tackles. You would kind of think he gets more and more work down the stretch. That could start tonight. So I'm good with Shepard, but once Kadarius Toney comes back, he's not going to. It's very clear that they want Kadarius Toney to be their number one. So I would probably hang on to AJ Brown, Sanders, and Jovante there. Question from Austin: Jarvis Landry or T. Higgins at flex and PPR. Not a lot of wideouts on waiver wire. Most of my wideouts have a bye week. Just because of the game environment, I'm going to go with T. Higgins there. I know it could be a little bit scary to fade Jarvis as potentially the healthiest, only pass catcher here, especially in a PPR league. But the offensive expectations not that high tonight, so I would lean with T. Higgins in a game that's at least a little bit more desirable from a stacking standpoint. Bethany says, don't put Dearness in the flex, though. Put him in a standard running back spot. Great point, Bethany. Very heads up managing there. Lots of banter going on that I'm sifting through here. Question from BB04: Devontae Booker or Damian Harris? So when I ran the simulations on, again, based on Number Fire's projections, they were pretty high on Damian Harris this week. He came out at a 54% probability to have a top 24 week in half PPR scoring. But Devontae Booker came out at 61%. So I would lean Booker there regardless. I like the workload more. I like the offense more. I like that game more. I think the Jets-Patriots game is the worst game of the week outside of, this game probably. But Devontae Booker should be set into, a really heavy snap rate. And the Carolina defense started off really hot, but not quite as good as they showed in the first few weeks. So I would go with Devontae Booker there. Question from DJ: Donovan Peoples-Jones for tonight or no? So yeah, I mean, I think that Peoples-Jones will probably get a little bit too much love for what he did last week, which included a Hail Mary touchdown to inflate things. So with that being said, I probably would try to identify. And so I'm getting a lot of start sit questions, which is totally fine. But in terms of this single game slate, what it comes down to is just, I'll say it like game theory, where you can play both quarterbacks. You can play neither quarterback. It depends on how you view this game going. Peoples-Jones, I would assume, gets a big bump down with Landry coming back and with the wind, because Peoples-Jones can get downfield work. Let me see here. Just the 0.7 downfield targets per game. But last week, I'm pretty sure he had multiple. Yeah, 2 last week with 1 in the red zone with a 20-yard ADOT again, boosted by that Hail Mary on his 5 targets. So, again, it's like everyone's in play because literally everyone can be rostered. But in terms of expectations versus popularity, I do think Peoples-Jones is a little bit overvalued from that perspective. But I do think that if you're pivoting away, or if you're stacking Case Keenum at that rate, you're expecting him to outperform multiple running backs with good roles, or at least ostensibly good roles, like for Dearness Johnson, who again could be phased out a bit, but not phased out, but just maybe not the feature back with what they do with their other backs, Demetric Felton, stuff like that. So I would say if you're playing Case Keenum, easily, especially at MVP, go with that double stack. That would include Peoples-Jones for sure. Outside of that, I think I'm just going to be down on this passing game overall because of the over under, because we see running backs so heavily in the MVP slot, and because just the wind is leading to that low point expectation overall. All right. Tim Patrick or Higgins? I really like Tim, but Teddy questionable. Yes, that's a good point. I mean, Teddy is questionable, which I mentioned, but he is going to play. We got win concerns. I like Teddy a lot. I love Courtney Sutton. In that spot, I think I just lean T. Higgins. Again, a better game environment for him. Play volume could be an issue between the Bengals and the Ravens, but it's not quite like this game that could very easily finish, you know, 17-13, and nobody would be surprised. That Bengals Ravens game could also finish that way, but it's going to just be from low play volume. So I would go Higgins there. Polly. Trying to see if I have any more about tonight specifically. It doesn't look like. So I'll dig into these. I mean, again, I'm showing up my simulations showing the projections at number fire for total touchdowns, the FanDuel Sportsbook odds for total touchdowns, which I will say, that Demetric Felton is plus 185 to score, probably is telling me more than I realize. The number fire projections aren't quite as high as that, but I don't know how many snaps out of the backfield he'll get. So he's a really interesting wild card for tonight, especially with everyone kind of going to Johnson, which makes more sense because, and I dug this up for the a recap podcast I do on Monday mornings. There were basically 4 snaps for the Browns after Kareem Hunt got hurt last week because Arizona had the ball for so long. There were like 4 snaps with Case Keenum. Johnson did play all 4 of those. Felton is much more of a special teamer, kind of I don't want to call him like a gadget player, but if you're expecting one of these guys to have, 15 plus carries and lead the team in rushing, it's going to be Johnson. But this number here, the plus 185 to score, really interesting to me for Felton. So I wanted to make that known before I dig into what it looks like is just all season long questions otherwise. Again, if you have any single game questions, get those in on the YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch chat, whatever you're using. But for now, I'll dig back into the season long and the start sit stuff. Question from Bo Pucks. Trade CEH and Gibson for JT. I'd get JT. Also start Tim Patrick tonight, or wait to see if Khalil Herbert is starting, which I think he is. So I actually publish trade value charts, or it's just a single chart on Number Fire every Tuesday. That stems from Number Fire's rest of season projections, and I actually really like that because it'll naturally factor in for the guys. Now we're starting to get into bye week territory. It'll factor in the guys who already had their bye weeks, and it just treats players as like the roles that they have, rather than the expectation for the role that we might think that they get. I would say blindly, before looking into that trade too much, I would take the JT side just because Gibson a little bit banged up. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, not really someone who might walk back into a lead role once he's healthy with how Darrell Williams played last week. So I would go JT. Also, for the Tim Patrick conversation, I'd probably not go there and just hope that we get Herbert starting. because I don't like this game enough to want to stack up like too many of my season long plays in this game. So yeah, I would wait there and go with Herbert. Follow up from Bopox. I have Collins and AJ Green starting over Tim Patrick right now. Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's so tough because this game could just be so bad tonight with the win being what it is. And if Case Keenum just gets, I understand that the Browns are favored here, but if Case Keenum gets the worst of the Denver defense, like Denver might not have to pass a lot, so I'd probably just try to avoid Tim Patrick if possible if you have those better options. Question from Patty: Start 3, bench 1. Terry, Moore, AJ Brown, Godwin. That's a good problem to have. I don't know. I mean, take your pick there, really. That's one of the ones where I don't have a strong enough opinion to pick one. I would probably lean toward benching Godwin just because the market share could be it could easily be the worst of the four. So probably Godwin, although I do love Godwin on FanDuel. This week at 6,700, I think he's a bit undersalaried there. Pauly says Sanders rest of season is also pretty nice. Yeah, I don't do a whole lot with rest of season projections or schedules, but what does is that trade value chart that I publish on NumberFire. Again, you can just check that out every Tuesday, and that does account for things like matchups now that we know more and more about opponent expectations. So, all the start-sit stuff, I have my personal preferences, but I also defer a lot to that trade value chart that I publish on those Tuesdays. DJ says, just got Deontay Johnson in a trade for T. Higgins and Zach Ertz. Thoughts? You got Deontay, traded away T and Ertz. I like that. I like getting the best player in a deal, even if it's a 2-for-1. Zach Ertz, while digging into those on-off splits that I talked about for Lane Johnson and how he has impacted Jaylen Hurts, I also took a dive into the Zach Ertz numbers, and Jaylen Hurts has actually been more efficient with Zach Ertz off the field. I'm not trying to pick on Zach Ertz, but he's not really a difference maker. And now that he's going into an offense where he'll have some pop games, but the market shares on that team are so dispersed anyway that I would be looking to trade Zach Ertz if I can before he plays. And if I'm wrong there, that's fine, because the odds that Zach Ertz goes to the Cardinals and is like a top 5, can't bench, can't fade tight end with the market shares being what they are, that seems very, very, very unlikely based on what we've seen from him recently. Bethany says, wait, you do the Thursday morning preview on Wednesday? No, I do. Bethany, you've been listening to us for like 10 years now. We do the Sunday preview for the main slate on Thursday mornings, and I'm previewing the Thursday night game now on Thursday. Question from Motive Jack, Miles Sanders or Josh Jacobs? That's a good one. I would be curious as to know who you have as your other running backs, just because these guys are kind of borderline. But the simulations this week have Jacobs at 67% to finish top 12 or top 24 rather. Miles Sanders 60%. I was going to say I would lean Jacobs anyway, just because he has the least chance to get phased out and be the secondary back within that offense. But both are viable. I like that game a good bit, but between the two, I would lean Josh Jacobs. That is all the questions I have for today. That is really all I have to say. Didn't do as much breakdown of the Thursday night slate as anticipated, but I get it because it's a game that only the DFS crowd could really love. So that's going to do it for me for the FanDuel NFL Q&A. Thank you to Joy Affleck for producing the video for this week and featuring those questions on this Q&A. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Gdula13 or check out my DFS content on numberfire.com. Best of luck tonight, and let's hit a big stack.